Okay, so just an introduction for those of you who don't know. This is the author of Electropunk, Dungeons and Dragons: The Darkened Wish, performer of LA by Night, Dimension 20, DM of G4's Invitation to Party, D&D's official channel for both Silver and Steel and Black Dice Society, and the lead developer of Into the Motherlands RPG. P. Dave Walters, thank you for joining us and
And
sharing
Dungeon
your
Master
wisdom.
for Stranger Things.
Yes, Dungeon Master for Stranger Things as
Yep.
of Friday, right? Yeah.
Thursday, but yes.
Okay.
Time's a flat circle. I reject it. Yes.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time. If you don't mind, these are all professional GMs, and those that are going to see this are professional GMs starting to scale their business. And I know that you, from listening to some of your interviews, had that kind of experience before SPG was a thing when you were running Vampire nonstop for a year. Um, and we were curious about how you built yourself up and how you conducted business and kind of your story, if you wouldn't mind sharing with us.
Yeah, I did Vampire and D&D. It was mostly Vampire. I did it for about 18 months. At the height, I had about 550 people and was running about 35 to 40 games a month, which for the record, I do not recommend. But yes. As for how I did it, um, I obviously I had the advantage of being known in the space for doing that thing because of being on LA by Night, being on Geek and Sundry, being in the public eye. But not a lot of those people knew that I ran games too, at least not initially, because I was a player in LA by Night. Mostly, if I could begin at the end, the number one thing you can do is put on the best possible experience you can for the people at your table, because they will tell other people, and that's how your thing grows. um, More than anything, as long as people are having a meaningful experience that is worth their time, they will come back and they will bring their friends. Another thing I will tell you is that people talk about all the difficulties with scheduling and all of that, and like kind of the meme about getting a group together and how hard it is. That is symptomatic of people not having a meaningful experience. The reality is, if you're putting on and you hear I keep referring to it as an experience and not a game, because your job as a dungeon master or a storyteller is first and foremost to elicit an emotional reaction, to get people to feel something. If they're shaking their head yes, if they're shaking their head no, if they're laughing, if they're crying, if they're terrified, anything is right. Your only enemy is this. Your only enemy is meh, right? So as long as they're engaged, they will be there. I had people that were getting up at 2, 3, 4 in the morning to play our games, the people that were overseas. I didn't have to make them do it. I just made it known when the game was, and people would do anything to be there. So as long as you're doing that, everything else will pretty much fall into place. I would start with that. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely number one there. So what would you say is a good way that just kind of shifting gears here to, especially for someone who ran a ton of games, how do you decompress post session when, especially when you're running more than one game in a day?
It's a lot. It's funny because when I did D&D in a castle in 2019, we ran 2 games a day for 3 days, and that was exhausting. I remember being just wiped out and just crawling into bed every night. And for me now, literally, that's Tuesday. Like, I tell people, I went from like a 10K runner to an ultra marathoner. Like, I would regularly do 4 games in a day, at the height of the thing, which again, I do not recommend. But it, I don't know. The decompression wasn't difficult, but I do find I would have a lot of dreams. I would routinely wake up thinking I fell asleep in the middle of a session, that I would still be like in the game and be like, oh, I lost track of what everybody was doing. And it would like take a minute for me to be like, no, you're asleep, bro. Like no one's here. Like that would happen a lot. So on the one hand, I say I didn't have any trouble with it, but my subconscious was definitely still chewing on it um, over time. Uh, what I would tell you more than anything, sorry, I'm choking on my coffee here. What I would tell you more than anything, even more important than why I started doing it and how I built it, is why I stopped doing it. Because the money was good. The money was getting better all the time. And what happened, and what is going to happen in your communities, and you have to be mindful of it, is people start getting toxic over it. Otherwise, good people start getting really weird. Because what happens is you have people who don't necessarily have a lot of pull or a lot of influence in their real life, and they start to have pull and influence in this sub community. And once you have pull and influence, maybe for the first time in your life, maybe for the first time in a while, you start to become very protective of it. And that's where gatekeeping comes from. That's where gatekeeping in all forms comes from. This is the thing that makes me special. And rather than want to share it with you, you start wanting to not share it with people. That's when, as things grow, that's when your cliques start to form. That's when things start to get weird and people start butting heads. And that's when the drama sets in. And that sucks, you know? I got to a point that I was tired. I mean, again, I'd run literally hundreds of games. So I was tired. I don't deny that part. But really, it was more that part of it. It was the having to manage everybody else's emotions and expectations. And it started with me just wanting to take a little break. And when I just felt so much better and so much lighter, that week break became 2, became a month, and then was like, actually, I'm just done doing this. You know, like I could parallel a very different time in my life that was a lot less fun. I was working about 20 hours a week. I think I had like 3 or 4 jobs. This is when I was breaking into the insurance business. So I was working for myself, but my first child hadn't even been born yet, actually. Yeah, no, I was just trying to have some steady income also. So I was working nights while I had my own thing going during the day. And the reason why I finally quit, because same thing, the money was good, but I realized one day, if I could pay someone for a good night's sleep, like if they were just like, here's a certain amount of cash for 8 uninterrupted hours of rest, I would pay them more than I was going to make at the job that night.
That's how you scale a business, yeah.
Exactly. And when I realized that was when I was like, oh, okay, it's time to change this. It's time to change this. Yeah. So that's something I would tell you to be mindful of from the beginning. I told my mods from the jump it would happen. It happens in every community, every game that's got guilds. It happens every club. It happens every time there's a team that's growing. It happens. It is largely survivable, but it is something to be acutely aware of from the very, 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 very beginning, especially when you get to the point that you got some OGs and you've been at this a year and a half, and new people are coming in, and sometimes the new person is the shiny new toy, and then weirdness. Weirdness. Yeah, so.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that a lot of us look at as we try to scale, because hours are finite for us per week, but after you hit like that 40 to 60 hours per week, a lot of us look at scaling up and just charging more simply, and like providing more value and just running less games. Did you end up scaling that way? I know that you went into production and things like that, but do you want to talk about your transition after that?
For me, I went the volume route first. Because I knew, I mean, out of the 168 hours of a week, I was prepared to, work 120 of them. I didn't care. The question you got to ask yourself 3 questions. How much are you trying to make? And then how many hours a month are you trying to work? Take the number of what you're trying to work, divide it into how much you're trying to make, and you've got your rate now. You divide that again by 4 to 6 seats. So if your goal is to make $2,000 and you're trying to do 10 hours a month, well, so now you need to make 200 an hour. All right. If you're trying to do 200 an hour, that means, let's say for a normal game, you need to charge $400. If you're trying to have 4 players, it's $100 a head that you need to charge $100 a head. But the third question is, are people going to pay you $100 a head? I can tell you they pay me way, 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 way more than that. So it can be done, But again, I had things they'd seen me do. And because of the parasocial nature of these games and these communities, streaming, when it is done best and when it is done properly, you should feel like you're at the table playing with your friends. So I had thousands of people that felt like we were friends who I'd never met before. That's the double edge of this thing. Unfortunately, sometimes, unfortunately, especially for some of the women in our community, but it happens to men too. That people feel like they know you, and like they'll roll up to you at cons and in public and stuff. It so happens I like that, and also I'm gigantic. I'm like 6'9", 270, and have black belts in multiple disciplines. I'm not afraid of anybody. So some just random person being like, "Hey," I'm like, "Hey, what's up?" But I mean, I've definitely experienced times, especially if I'm just like out, somebody's like rolling up on me quickly and being like, So it was easier for me to just put up the shop front of "come play with me" because people felt like they wanted to play with me. Turns out I was actually really good at it too, and they were almost surprised by that part. Like, "Oh, okay," and it kept going. So whatever your angle is, what I tell people, and this was way back to the infancy of D&D in a castle, when we had people that were trying to sell tables and stuff. You got to decide what your brand is, and it can be across multiple games. For me, mine is high stakes, high emotion. In D&D, I play level 20 is my niche. It became horror because Watsy asked me to do a Ravenloft show, but even with vampires, the same thing. Like, I very rarely tell street level stories. It may start street level, but it's going to become the city, the world hangs in the balance. That's the thing I do. Not everybody does it that way. Jason Carl, who is my very dear friend and was a storyteller on LA by Night, is the exact opposite. He loves down in the mud. Like, he doesn't want to go past level 7 in D&D parlance. He loves the beginning, when your back's against the wall and you're constantly on your heels. That's his jam, and that's okay. It's not my jam. So figure out what people can know you for, because trying to appeal to everyone is the exact same as trying to appeal to no one. If you've never read it, Google something called 1,000 Loyal Fans. Paraphrasing it, it is, you don't need tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people to support you in the thing you do. You really only need about 1,000 people that will buy anything you put out, and you can build a career off of that. And that's not a high bar to clear, especially because you can be deceived by seeing people's social media following with thousands and thousands and thousands of followers, and you may not have that, and you think, well, I can't compete. But that's not true at all, especially if they got those thousands and thousands of followers, but they got no engagement, or if they put something out, people don't support it. It doesn't matter. I was just tweeting the other day, because Christine Ariel was talking about the fact that she had somebody that declined to work with her because she didn't have 1 million followers. And I was like, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, because someone who has 10,000 followers but can move 5,000 of them to action is more useful than someone with 100,000 followers that can move 0 to action. If that makes sense. So I kind of went on a long tangent there, but to bring it all the way back to the beginning, I would pin that at the forefront of your mind. Why should someone want to play with you? And there's a lot of good answers to that, but it's a question you should be prepared to answer.
Yeah, people get really mad about that, because especially when they find out what I make and they're like, "But you have 58 YouTube subscribers. How is this possible?" And I'm like, "Well, there was business before mass social media influencer business, so it's like,
Mhm.
yeah, absolutely." So, okay. And I wanted to open up to some of the other members of the cohort who might have some questions. If we wanted to start with Nat, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So you mentioned this inevitability of this community messiness, let's say it. Does that still sit as something that's worthwhile? Because I know, for instance, Friday, doesn't have a massive community aspect or people engage with each other. Do you think that that is something worth pushing into? Would you do it again in your situation? Or do you think because of your size and your specific place you were sitting, you didn't really have a choice?
I absolutely don't regret it at all. It's just, I don't know, at the risk of using a crass metaphor, if you're going to have a dog, you're going to have to scoop some poop. Like, you're just gonna,
Yeah.
you know. I think if you end up that you have a group of people that you keep siloed, where maybe like only those 4 to 6 people play with each other week in, week out, maybe you can avoid it. But honestly, I wouldn't even say that that's going to guarantee that you're going to be able to avoid it, because something's gonna happen. It's just gonna, because the part of these games, players don't realize this, especially new players. Your first few characters, your first 3 or 4 or 10, if you're not mindful of it, are you. You will come in and you will play your best self, but you're going to play yourself, even if you don't realize it. And so, for me, when I did We're Alive Frontier, my character Chateau ended up being the leader of an unruly band of outlaws and misfits that wouldn't listen to reason to their detriment. So Vampire the Masquerade rolls around and ended up being the diplomat in the party face. Roll around to Vampire the Masquerade. I expressly intended Victor not to be a leader. I was like, who's somebody that would actually be having a pretty good time being a vampire? A nightclub promoter. Dope. So, and then the opportunity to become Baron presented itself, and I took it because I am who I am. Roll around to playing freely in D&D. That was the reason why he was the halfling of action, is supposed to be the exact opposite of Victor. I was like, I don't want a diplomat. I don't want a face. And I was like, what do you guys need in the group? They were like, a party face. And I was like, damn it. Okay. And I ended up building him as a charisma-based character, even though I was doing it for the other mechanics of just the thought exercise of a 4-class character. And he ended up being the party face in the, the talky one again. And it was about that time that I was like, wait a minute, why did these things keep happening like over and over and over again? I was like, oh, that's not them, that's me. Oh, okay. And when I realized that, then I was able to diversify a little bit. That in almost every character I make is the exact opposite of the one before. That's why literally Freely was small, because Victor is big, because Victor is me. So when I did Marseille the Typhoon for Dimension 20, Freely's a halfling, Marseille's a bugbear. He was as big as possible. He's this morally gray, shadowy ganker. He's everything Freely isn't. So almost every character, you could plot them on a graph like that for me. So to bring that back to the point, people, especially when they put on that mask and they get used to it and they wear it for a while, don't realize how much of themselves is in it, which is why sometimes when they butt heads in character, that's what bleed is. That's what bleed is. Something happened in the game that hurt my human feelings. And that in and of itself is not bad, because, as I said before, your job is to elicit an emotional reaction. So in a strange way, someone who actually gets their feelings hurt means they were engaged enough to be vulnerable to allow their feelings to be hurt. So while it's sad and you have to manage that, it's at least they were present enough that it was even possible, if that makes sense.
Yeah, they're present. They cared enough to be potentially affected by it.
Exactly. And vulnerability in openness are the most important things in these things, especially if you're doing horror, because safety and consent is the most important thing for horror, for people to be able to let their guard down when they know you're going to hit them at some point over the course of the next 2 hours, to drop your hands and stand there versus being like this the entire time, like that's, something that people have to feel very safe and very comfortable to even be able to do. So, yeah, again, all of these things are knotted up with a bunch of different things all at once. So, yeah.
We'll untangle it later. So, Bunny, did you have a Did you have a question?
I did. I had two questions.
My body's ready.
Multiple. So the first question that I had kind of has to do with you. Hold up. I wrote them down because I have social anxiety. Give me 1 second.
You're good.
They're in the
I
homework.
actually have two screens.
Yeah.
You guys are over here too. So every time I turn my head, I'm still looking at you. Yeah. All right.
All right. So how do you work on guiding your players without railroading them? Because personally, I find myself like, this is the idea. And, you know, everyone makes the joke about herding cats. That's a really real thing. But the worst part about it is when the plot that you had doesn't really exist anymore. And the game becomes more of a patchwork of improv to kind of give it a similarly themed ending or a similarly themed way. How do you go about doing that without feeling like you're going, stop it?
I would say two things. If you haven't seen it yet, watch the things I did for the kids from Stranger Things this week, because that's exactly what happens. So you'll see it happen in real time of me doing the thing you're asking me. How do you do it?
Okay, good. All right, cool. So
the second
I will
thing,
get that answered.
but I'll give you a more direct answer right now. Is you may hate to hear this, but their enjoyment is more important than the story you intended to tell. You can hit the notes that you wanted to hit in a lot of different ways, but if you've set up, you know, I guess to use a common metaphor, if your plan was for them to go to Castle Ravenloft, but they want to spend the entire adventure in the village of Barovia, but they're having a good time, let them have a good time. Let them have a good time. You know, you can, that's the most important thing. And I think a lot of times people, especially people that are homebrewing or have done a ton of prep, get their minds clouded by this because you have a vision in your head of what's supposed to happen. I won't say that is not important. It is important. Otherwise, they wouldn't be showing up at your table. But it is secondary to the experience. At the end of the night, they need to feel like they had a good time. When I plan adventures now, even when I'm streaming, I very carefully plan the beginning, the inciting incident. I know roughly where I intend for it to be by the half and roughly where it should be by the end, but I never plan the second half because both the dice and the characters will surprise and betray you. You know? So you're like, yeah.
I had a whole group that I had set for them to go to the future because I run Masks. It's a superhero one. And instead they went in the past. And I mean, like I had a grand narration on how the future looked and they went to the past.
Well, we're in the past now. You know what I mean?
We're in the past now.
Like dope, we're in the past. One thing I will say, part of the reason why I don't play with maps and minis is I know there's times that you're down in the dungeon, you can go left or you can go right. The dragon's behind the next door. If you split the group and you go left and right, there's now two dragons behind the next doors. You know, like you can, for lack of a better word, cheat it in such a way to make it seem like it was always a part of your grandmaster plan. Like,
yep, that's what I've been doing, faking it.
Yeah. And that's it. I mean, that's it. That's the discipline. You know, that they're going to be like, it is simultaneously surprising yet inevitable. You know. So yeah.
The other question that I had to do more with world building because I do have more of a homebrew world than not.
I know, because when you were talking about being afraid of railroading people, I know you got a whole thing laid out. I saw it all.
Nah, man. Nah, man.
I already knew that, but okay, yes, please proceed.
Like there's a timeline being made by players. Like I have to actually be on my crap now, but I'm afraid that even though they are paying a lot of attention to the small details, the world as a whole is not being memorable. Only the things that have to do with continuing on kind of what they do and not so much where they are. Like the world isn't fleshed out, but like the 5-block radius is. Am I trying to do too much in trying to make the entire world expansive, or should I only focus? Okay, so that's what I'm doing. Okay, cool.
It's you know, I tell people all the time, nobody cares about your 10,000 years of history. You know, your yay, the gods beget, in this kingdom rose and fell. Nobody cares. The greatest world building ever For 1,000 generations, the Jedi were the peacekeepers of the old Republic. That's it. You know what I mean? Literally thousands of pages of writing and hundreds of hours of content have come out of that one sentence, because that was all that was necessary. The only time you in a perfect world, if your story's set in New York, you know, I know roughly this gang controls the Bronx. I know roughly Tribeca is an irradiated hellscape. I know roughly the mob has the docks, you know, unless your story is going that way, because it's good to know those things because you can sort of seed them from the future, you know, like if you've already created Lex Luthor, you can mention LexCorp here and there, sponsored by LexCorp or C Flyers or whatever. But that doesn't mean you need to know that Lex Luthor is in the tower and he has Mercy, who is his enforcer. And you know what I mean? Like, you know, it's like a bit.
The more vague I keep it, the more they can start doing things, kind of a way.
The more vague they keep it, the more you can start doing things, and the more options you give yourself. And here's another thing. If you do have a plan, the plan can change. I don't know how much, if any of you are writers as well. They write for film and television and did, you know, the comic and all this other stuff. I am huge into planning your narrative in advance. But understand, I'm very much against what they call pantsing it, where you just sit down and write. I'm like, it's the worst thing you could ever do. But you can understand that if your plan was you're going to get to the denouement and she pulls the trigger, but in the process of getting there, you realize that's not what she'd do. You don't have to make her pull the trigger. You know what I mean? Like that, and that works your thing too. You know, that I don't like it when a lot of times people set up stories where there's no option, no chance, no hope for things. That, like, for instance, when you get to the big bad, if they want to talk, or they have if they truly have a compelling non-combat solution, truly, if whether or not you make them roll for it, or if you roll for it and it wins, and it's just like, nah, Vecna's gonna fight you because he's Vecna, roll initiative. I'm like, that's bullshit. And they will resent it. They will resent it actively. You know, it's the same way. Let me tell you a story what happened to me. I had a buddy of mine this was Pathfinder. I played a Pathfinder game from level 1 to level 20 because I was a 4th edition refugee that didn't play D&D through all of 4th edition. So I went over and I was doing Pathfinder. And a buddy of mine, his concept was he's a dragon slayer. You know, level 1, you ain't slaying nothing, you know, but it's like, okay. Fairly early in the game, like level 4 or 5, he got what was called an arrow of slaying shot, which in Pathfinder, it basically had a pretty low save, but if the creature didn't fail the save, it died outright. So he got a black arrow of slaying, you know, very early. Literally a year later, like of like real human time, a calendar year later, I had a whole encounter planned where a dragon was going to attack the town they were in. And I had it broken down round by round. I was like, round 1, the dragon's going to fly over and breath weapon, and then it's going to leave. And it's round 2, it's going to turn around. Round 3, it's going to come back and land. You know, like I knew what was going to happen. Set this whole big thing up. He wins the initiative roll. Round 1, attack 1, natural 20. He's like, I'm going to use my arrow slaying shot. I'm like, you're what? He's like, my arrow slaying shot that I got. And I'm like, oh, word? Yeah, you do have that. Okay, but I'm like, there's no way this dragon's going to fail the save. So have at it. Rolls, natural 20. I rolled a save, 1. And I'm like, I had a moment there where I could have said the dragon made the save. I could have been like, oh, well, there's 2 dragons or whatever. But no, I let him shoot the dragon out of the sky because that's what the dice said happened. He goes crazy. This is 10 years later. They still talk about that. You know, because it meant more to him to let it happen. My plan didn't matter. Giving him a chance to be a G is what mattered, you know? So you always kind of keep that at the forefront of your mind. I will say, and I hate if this is Actually, I won't tell you. This would be a slight spoiler for what just happened at the Netflix thing. So I'm not gonna tell you. Never mind. I'll tell you this later. I'll tell you Friday. I'll tell you offline, and then after they watch it, you can tell them what my story was. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so Sarah, did you have some questions?
Yeah, hi B Dave. I'm still surprised about the Christina thing because she's amazing and everybody should work with her. But my question,
Haters gonna hate you.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right. I'm going to be focusing on Dragon Age and really sinking into the horrors of abominations and the Darkspawn and all of that.
Mhm.
And I, in the past, when I've done horror games, I've literally caused personal bladder control issues for people. So I
Good.
yeah, good. It's great. It's fantastic. But I don't necessarily want to do that. And I'm wondering if is there aside from body cues, because I don't know if we're going to be on video call or anything, is there any tips that you can give for how not to literally scare the pants off of your players? Or if there's anything where you've reached a point where you're really in character and you need to pull it back a little bit, anything for pacing like that.
I ran into something similar in that I've been doing Ravenloft for a year now, and then I just ran 6 sessions of Legends of the Multiverse, which will air as 12 episodes, but the vibe of it is supposed to be Guardians of the Galaxy, not scary, not aliens. So it was difficult for me to find that medium ground. And the reality is they put a lot of brain-eating monsters in the Spelljammer, like a lot. So I was like, you don't get mad at me. You made this thing. I just used it, you know? I think it just comes to everything you just said, of course, but just sort of a question of the stakes and how you're describing it, you know? Like if the werewolf is going to chase them around the house and into the woods and up a tree is quite different than you come into the room and the werewolf has already eaten the children and there's blood sprayed across the walls. You know, I mean, it is a degrees of what they stand to lose in how you describe it in the scene that you said. And honestly, your biggest pressure valve is humor, because humor serves to diffuse tension. That's what humor's for. That's why we laugh. When you're trying to build tension in a horror setting, humor is absolutely your enemy. You don't want people cracking jokes when you're trying to build tension. When you are trying to ease up on it a little bit, interjecting a little bit of levity is the way to do it, especially if right after that you're like, oh, boom, the axe comes to the wall, you know, and then you get them to lower their defenses and you get them that way. You also can just check in. You can check in via chat. You can check in just out loud, you know, is everybody all right? The game that I am the proudest of that I've ever done was a 4-part Wraith of the Oblivion game that I did on Q Times. I did Vampire, Werewolf, Mage, Changeling, and Wraith. Wraith was incredible, because if you're not familiar with Wraith, it is a part of the World of Darkness. It's in the same continuity as Vampire, Werewolf, Mage, and Changeling. And you're a ghost, you know, a ghost. You've got unfinished business. Something is stopping you from crossing over to whatever waits for us in the great beyond. But you have something called your shadow. And your shadow isn't your evil twin. Your shadow is you. Your shadow is everything you're not proud of, every mistake you ever made, every lie you ever told, and your shadow hates you. And when you're at the table, you play your wraith in someone else's shadow. And so the things they were saying and doing to each other over the course of that game, I was just like, God damn. Like more than once, I had to obscure my face because they were having a really intense scene and I didn't want to be like, you know, just look away. And it's up on YouTube. It's in the Q Times YouTube. But all through that, in chat, they're constantly like, you okay? Oh my God, I love you. Am I pushing too hard? Is this all right? You know what I mean? Those words are going by over here while On screen, though, they were just terrible. One other thing that I recommend, well, I assume you all know about the yellow and red cards and, lines and veils and whatnot. I always request that people say something to me privately. Send me a private message, send me a text or whatever, because sometimes people are embarrassed to say in front of the group that they're uncomfortable. They don't want everybody to know they're uncomfortable, but they can just let you know. You know what I mean? They're like, yellow X, and you're like, dope. And to let off the gas a little bit.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've and that actually the comedy thing leads into my next question. Would you suggest investing in improv classes or character voice acting type classes, community college, anything like that earlier, and like try to build out that repertoire formally, or just, if you pick up a workshop in LA, then you pick up a workshop type of thing?
I mean, it's funny that you say that, because I'm actually working on a masterclass thing now for players and DMs.
Oh shit.
Yeah. Do it because you want to, not because you have to. You don't have to do voices. I think improv is worth its weight in gold, just to be quick on your feet, but you don't have to, like you don't, I think the reason why you see that, it's kind of a chicken or the egg type thing. Most of the people that you see on the big streams are all out here in LA. We all know each other. We're all within a half hour of each other because we were all actors anyway. So those are skills we possess that easily translate into this medium, but they're not necessary. I wouldn't tell anybody to do those things unless you're saying to yourself, I wish I was better at doing voices. Then you should do that for you. You shouldn't do that because I'm like, oh, if you can't do voices, you can't do this. Jason Carl doesn't do many voices, if you notice. Like, I mean, it's like a very, very, small thing. Let me see. I'm doing a voice acting class right now, but I've had zero formal training. No acting, no improv, no nothing. It was the books and a natural affinity that I just happen to be good at it, so.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look up the masterclass whenever it comes out. I'm also in the LA area and have been like trying peripherally to get into voice acting for swim time. But yeah, that's what I'm part of. My big brand is doing monster noises and doing different sorts of the scary sounds. So that's why I'm interested in that a lot.
What I just put in, I'm taking that ladies class that Jason Charles Miller recommended to me. So there you go. Now I'm recommending to you. I have my last session tomorrow, actually.
Thank you. So seriously, thank you for that. Cause I have been scammed before by a place that was down in San Diego. That was not, So I don't want to have that happen.
Yeah. Nope. She's legit. It's been a lot of fun. It's yeah, do it for you. You know what I mean? If it's a skill that you just want to possess, there was something I was about to say about horror and comedy, and I lost it. It'll come back. It'll pop up in another ramble.
Cam, did you have a question?
Yeah, I guess one of my questions would be sort of back to how you were mentioning you don't really run like figures and maps and whatnot. So how does one necessarily go about advertising value without being like, hey, I have all these shiny things, come look at, like, this is animated and here's a thing I spent 6 hours on, even though it might not affect you if you don't care about it?
I mean, same thing that I was just telling Sarah. If that's your jam, do it, and also it depends on the game. Like, obviously, if you're trying to run Warhammer, you're gonna be on the hook to have a lot more things than if you're running a vampire. I'm about to make a statement that I'm running over and over in my head to try and figure out if I think it's true or not before I actually say it. I don't know that the shininess of your trinkets is actually a selling point. you know, because you got neat toys, okay, but what's the experience I'm going to have? Now, that being said, there's some people that minis and stuff are their jam. So can you fill a table with 6 people that really do care that much about your stuff? Yeah, probably, probably. But I don't know if the experience is not there, they're not going to come back. Because once, like, here, let me give an example. This big chunky baby's my pride and joy, right? Yeah. Is the Tiamat brings me endless happiness every time I turn and look at her, right? And I did a whole series where Tiamat was the main antagonist, and she's a very special place in my heart. But now you've seen it. So unless there's something else, now what? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
if that's your thing, great. But those bells and whistles aren't ultimately what will keep people coming back again and again, if that makes sense.
Checks out.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Because let me tell you what will keep people coming back, for the record. Why people actually play these games. If somebody's typing, and it sounds like jackhammering. I don't know who that is. But it's like, I'm like, take cover. The thing, here's why people actually play these games that most people don't understand because they've never taken the time to ask themselves. And it's very similar to what I tell you about why it goes wrong. People play these games to feel like they are at cause in the narrative, to have what they do or don't do matter. So anytime you are facilitating their choice having repercussions, consequences, or an impact is good. The extent to which you take that from them is bad, which is what I was getting at with Bunny. If they want to go to the past, they go to the past. If they want to go to the past and you make them go to the future, you've now taken that from them. And that's not a good thing, because that's what they showed up for, to feel like they have an impact. And that's from the grittiest street level hero story where we got to protect this one block from drug dealers, to we're Green Lanterns in protecting a sector of space. You know, if we fail, that's not good. You know, if we do something, that is good. I personally love I will take what they do. I will think of what's the worst possible outcome from what you've done and then do that thing. That's the recipe when I'm yes-anding. I'm like, whatever, I'm going to say yes to whatever you want. But what is the worst possible thing that could be a consequence, and then do that thing.
You make me feel so much better for the way I bully my players, because you keep saying all the things I do.
But they want to be hurt. They want to be stabbed.
They do. They do. Ivan said to me once, he's like, you must hurt them. It is the only way to earn their love. I was like, thanks, Ivan. It's nobody wants the game to be too easy. They think they do, but they don't. I actually won Dungeons and Dragons. You know, everybody says it's not possible to win. Oh yeah, it is. In 3.5, I had a druid planar shepherd with the vows of peace, poverty, and nonviolence. All you need to know is that character was actually unkillable and could do literally anything. I basically made a god. And that was fun for about 2 sessions, where you're like, yay, I can do anything. And then I realized I could do anything. And I started to have to, like, I had to split the party on purpose so the other people could have something to do, because my character could do literally anything. And then, you know, even when I had to like solo things, I just ran it over, and it was like, oh, that's actually not fun. Right. You know? Yeah.
And then any sort of advice where in order to help keep the sort of narrative or stakes alive, where in this business we tend to have people drop in and out like midway through a campaign?
Mhm. For my D&D game, it was like a Spelljammer Planescape mashup where they were on a ship that they were a part of they were a mercenary crew that had new members were assigned and then redirected elsewhere. And that was the premise. You know, the home base sent you this bugbear gloomstalker this week, and they may or may not be there next week. And here's today's mission. For Vampire, every episode, most every episode, started at the Elysium. It's tonight at the Elysium. Who's here? You know, and you see who's here, and then hijinks ensued based on that. When people are coming in and out, it is harder to have a meta plot, but you just have to cut it into smaller slices. Where like here is something important that is happening this week. I will tell you a very sneaky thing you can do is cliffhangers. Make them want to come back. You know what I mean? Like you kill the dragon, but the earth rumbles and cracks open and demons come pouring out, and you're like, what? And you're like, that's a good place for us to stop. And they're like, gotta come back. You know, you still don't cheapen them the beginning, middle, and end of what they've come for today, but you give them the cliffhanger, the carrot to come back tomorrow. You know, I will also tell you, just to frame it in your own head, the way I kept a game with 500 people going clear in my head was I wasn't telling the story of any given character. I was telling the story of Los Angeles. So I always knew where LA was. And then these people are coming in and out of it, and they're affecting it. And I would keep notes about things, and I would have callbacks. I would have hooks that were unique to each person. But the story was actually about the city. And then that became much, much easier to manage.
Okay, and shifting gears, if you don't mind, back to business, because that's all I think about. What is like everybody has like a certain pitch that they work on. What's like a tried and true way that you try to sell an idea to an investor, sponsor, production studio, or anything like that?
Well, those are all very different questions. Am I trying to get somebody to give me a budget for a stream, or an advertiser to sponsor a stream? Don't say both. It's not the same thing. Or get somebody to play in a game. So which are you asking?
Let's have it apply to, for instance, someone that is trying to get a budget from a publisher, license, maybe a campaign setting or something like that, and grow in that way with as a writer or as someone contributing to a project.
Contributing to a book or contributing to a stream?
A book.
It's very difficult. It's very difficult. For the most part, you don't go to them, they come to you, and they come to you because they've heard of you. It's the number one thing you can do for yourself in this space is start networking. It is the thing that opens doors. Get people to know who you are and that you do good work. And the way you do that is social media is your friend. Start participating in people's threads when they're on Twitter and things. Comment on their threads. If they stream, show up in their channels and comment often. Get used to them seeing your name. Don't do this in a predatory way. They will know. Don't DM people and be like, can you help me get into their publisher? They will not. And not only will they not, they will tell other people that you did it, and then those people won't help you get in either. It is just form relationships by actually being cool with people. That is what will open the door more than anything. Because I can tell you, this is exactly how this goes down. Working on a project. We need another writer. What about John? Had a rough had a bad experience with John. Really? Yeah. All right. Not John. What about Cindy? Cindy's dope. Cool. Let's get Cindy. That is literally what happens. I'm lead developing Into the Motherlands right now. That's what happened. That we were like, these 4 people are dope. Oh man, not that guy. Really? Nope. Okay, not that guy. How about these 3? Yeah, she's super cool. Done. That's it. It's not query letters. It's not reaching out to them and saying, hey, can I work on the project? Because unless it is a very chicken or the egg thing, unfortunately. You're like, how do I get experience if nobody will give me a chance? I wish I had a good answer for that. What I would submit, the thing you can control is start writing and publishing your own stuff. You can put it on the DMs Guild, but there's so much competition on the DMs Guild, I actually recommend you give it away for free. You're like, here's an adventure I wrote, or you could put it up for donation or whatever, that you're like, here it is, it's free for donation, I really liked it. And it's a lot of it is luck, and a lot of it is just output. That if somebody looks and sees that you've written 10 adventures, then it's like, oh well, this person will finish something, that's cool, you know. It is way, and I hate to say this because it sounds so LA, but I'm not gonna lie to you. It's more important that somebody know Bunny's name and that Bunny seems cool, that her stuff is actually good, because they're not gonna take the time to read it. You know, it's like, do you have a positive standing in the eyes of people that they trust? And again, that does not mean do you have thousands and thousands and thousands of followers. It's, do people who are legit think you are legit? That's what opens the doors. It will open the doors at smaller publishers before it opens them at big ones. You know, like I don't want to insult anybody, but you know, the Renegades of the world will come knocking long before the Watsies of the world will come knocking. But that's how the Watsies of the world come knocking. Tales from the Radiant Citadel. Half the people in Tales from the Radiant Citadel have only published on a very small scale or not at all. They knew they wanted POC. They knew they wanted up and coming POC. And that's why they reached out to the people that they reached out to. But it was all about who knew who, you know? So.
Same question this time, looking for investor if you are creating a project.
Crowdfunding. Don't try and get somebody to give you money, because they're not gonna. And it's not just that they won't, they probably don't have it. Most places are operating on shoestring budgets because the margins in the TTRPG space are very, very small. Most people just don't have a lot of money to give you for a thing. A lot of times though, unless you want to do an official stream, you don't even need their permission to do a stream, usually. To create content, a lot of times you don't even need their permission to do content. If you do something like, again, with D&D, you go through the DMs Guild, Vampire, there's a Storyteller's Vault. So there's a way to go about it. It's just, it is very, very, very difficult to get companies to actually write you a check, because they can't. What they will give, they'll give you a lot of stuff. You can get a lot of swag. Wait, hang on. Wait, let me show you this. Come on. There we are. There we are. That's a Blackmagic camera. The Blackmagic is giving me a bunch of things over time. It's like I got a whole Blackmagic Switch thing here. Like I can do my sexy effects, like, ooh, wait. Oh, did I work? It didn't work. Oh no. I didn't get to do my cool thing. Now I'm sad. She's not cooperating. Oh, I know why it's not working. Hang on. Nope. She doesn't want to. She does. Oh, there we go. Boom. Woo. Finally. Ooh. Ah. You know. So you'll get that. Like, people will give you tons of dice. They'll give you products. They will give you shout outs. They will give you product placements. All of those things are very valuable. It is very, 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 very few people will actually write a check.
And I have a minor thing to contribute. That's actually how I got my first stream on Kobo Press. Was I built the show, I ran a session 0 as a pilot, and I showed them, and they were like, hey, that's great. Since you've already done all the work, we'd love to put you on.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yep. You know, I would submit also that even being an official show on an official channel may or may not be the advantage you think it is. Because when you're starting from the beginning, having something that is yours and you own is significantly more valuable in the long term than doing an official thing in the short term. There's pluses and minuses to both. It's the exact same thing as like getting a book published by a publisher versus self-publishing something. Being published is for prestige. Self-publishing is for profit. You will make many magnitudes more money putting out your own thing, but more people will hear about it if you go through somebody else. So the correct answer is actually to do both, but that's the chicken or the egg of it. What I was saying about crowdfunding, if you got your homebrew campaign world or thing like that you're really trying to build up, trying to get an investor or selling it to somebody is pointless. They're not interested. Nobody is going to care until you've already done all the work and proved the concept, exactly like what Friday just said. After we already funded Motherlands, every publisher in the world wanted it from us, which was expressly why I wanted to crowdfund before we look for a publisher, because it's a very different conversation to sit down at the table with $350,000 in the bank than it is to show up hat in hand with an idea, because literally everybody has an idea. The thing about crowdfunding, which is a whole talk all in of itself, crowdfunding is not the place to go and find a following. It's to leverage your existing following. Recall back to what I was saying about the 1,000 loyal fans. To already have people that give a damn about what you do and will actively go to bat for you when it comes out. If you have those two pillars in place, then funding a project is not that difficult. Am I 5 for 5 or 6 for 6 now? I don't remember, but 75% of crowdfunding projects fail. All of mine have succeeded, and that's why.
Dan, did you have a question?
Yeah, hi, B Dave. I had a quick question, and this is kind of barring the parasocial aspect of it and the many hours you put in when you first started, obviously, because you talked about how you didn't mind it because that's just who you are. What would you say was the most difficult thing that you had to overcome to get to from doing these games 140 hours a week or whatever it may be, all the way up to DMing for Stranger Things?
Sorry, before when we didn't call on you, I was like, maybe that dude's the producer or something. So sorry about that. Yeah.
No, it's no worries.
It's going to take longer than you think. I did it as fast as it was humanly possible, and I think Abria did it a little faster than me, and it's still been about 5 years. It's going to take longer than you think. This is initially a nights and weekends business. I would never advise anyone ever to quit their full-time job and just dive into it. Even when you're thinking about going full-time, I'd say don't even consider it until you have at least 3 months worth of your living expenses in the bank to be able to take the plunge, because you have to find a way to enjoy the process. You have to find a way to be patient with it and enjoy it. And if you're stressed about money, you can't do that. Especially since there are things that will affect your clientele base that have nothing to do with you, like gas being $7 a gallon. That's, people are tightening belts. What's one of the first things to go is, these things that are a pastime. I was fortunate in that, actually, I was just getting out of doing these right before the pandemic, but that was part of the reason why my streaming took off, because everybody was home. I mean, I could have made 10 times more money if I'd kept doing these games when everybody was at the house. I just sort of pivoted to a thing that I could, tape once and people would watch 10,000 times instead of having to be there, in person. Because that's the hardest part about this. Remember what I told you about: decide what you want to make, decide how much you want to work, divide it out, and that's your rate. Is what you want to try and figure out as soon as possible are as many ways as possible to monetize this that don't require you to sit here and be here present. Right now I'm talking to you guys, love it, it's great, but I'm literally not doing anything else. You know, I'm not with my kids. I'm not working on another project. I'm not, you know what I mean? So as long as you are generating hourly revenue, there is a cap on what you can possibly make. So find whatever it is. If you're charging $1,000 an hour, $5,000 an hour, either way, like I said, there's 168 hours in a week. There's a limit, whatever it may be, if it requires you to be sitting here doing a thing. So find a way to diversify that as soon as possible. So I think it wasn't hard for me because I've enjoyed the process, but I would say that's the most perilous thing about it. Believe it or not, racism isn't really a problem in this space. I know, it's wild. In fact, a lot of times the push for diversity and inclusion is a strength. It's gotten me a lot of gigs that I'm like, hey, win one for affirmative action, you know? So being, I mean, don't get me wrong, cis white males are still doing great, but being a non-cis white male is also highly advantageous in this space in a way that it is not advantageous in most of life. You know, I think I'd also say trust your gut. Some people are gross, but you'll know they're gross. That's the thing. Whenever people are like, oh, I can't believe that person is gross, I'm like, you sure you can't believe it? You sure? Really? You know, really sure? That's all I have to say about that. Yeah, the other thing that I would say, if you can, like what you guys are doing is great here. But you're all dungeon masters. You're not competing with each other. Just to give you an idea, the next Monday, me, Jason, Carl, Matt Mercer, and Brennan are all going to go out and hang out. You know what I mean? Like everybody at the top end of this game, like we're all friends. We all spend time together. Like it's not competition. You know, my show, The Black Dice Society, is on right before Critical Role, because that goes all the way back to when we were all at Geek and Sundry, and the stream for Dark and Wish was supposed to be right before Critical Role as sort of their opening act, and then everything kind of went to hell over there. But while I wouldn't put a show up head to head against them, besides that is game on, because most of the people watch these things as VODs anyway. Like it's not a lot of live views unless you actively cultivate your content in such a way that it rewards people for watching it live if there's chat interaction or something like that. So you don't, all of that is to say, you don't have to worry about, you know, oh, but they're doing this and I'm doing this. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, I mean, if you can coordinate your times, that's all well and good. But if you're doing vastly different things, even that doesn't matter. You know, but what I was going to say is if you can find a group of people that you can all come up at the same time. If you have people, aspiring players that want to play at a high level, if you have an aspiring producer, if you have aspiring writers, if you are multiples of those things, support each other and come up together. Because, you know, the most of the people, you know, that I play with today, I was with 5 years ago. So, but, and I guess one other thing that I think you all probably know this because you've taken the step to want to go pro. But, you know, a speech I always give about this Matt Mercer effect or whatever, people are like, oh, I can't do what Mercer does. You can't do what I do. Can't do what Brennan does. Yeah, you can't. You actually can't. You literally cannot do what I do. But we can't do what you do. We can't tell your stories and weave the narratives that you're weaving and take people on the adventures and experience that you're doing. And that's what makes what you're doing just as valid as anything that we're doing. You gotta set the stage and let these people come and live their own mythology. Like you were talking about an elevator pitch. When I explain what it is that I do to people that don't play these games, I am like, what's your favorite book? What's your favorite movie? What's your favorite TV show? Lord of the Rings? Dope. How would you like to live the Lord of the Rings? Really? They're in. You know, give them a chance to live that mythology, to take that idealized version of themselves that they are consciously or unconsciously playing and bring it to life and form memories with their friends. Because what's wild, and a lot of times people underestimate the impact and the power of this type of storytelling, is that your brain does not know the difference between something that is real and something that is vividly imagined. Not to get too nasty, but all of us know you can intensely visualize a fantasy and you will get a physiological response. Your body doesn't know the difference. So when you're fighting fantasy dragons, in your mind, it's real heroism. It's real. When they win and they're like, yay, that's real. When one of them gets killed and they're all heartbroken, that's real. So focus on giving that to someone, because that's the greatest gift you can possibly bestow. And the last thing I will say in this particular rant is, for my money, storytelling is what makes us human. Everything else we do, some other animal does. And in the fullness of time, when we find out what crows and ravens and elephants and dolphins are saying to each other, they may be telling stories too. But right now, we're the only ones that can sit around the fireplace and talk about the labors of Hercules and take real, meaningful, actionable insight about life from it. So being a storyteller is a sacred gift. Storytellers create reality. It's no coincidence that the little kids that grew up reading Jules Verne put a man on the moon. The kids that grew up watching Star Trek literally made holopads and 3D printer replicators, and the things that they saw, they made reality. You know, that's a gift that storytellers give to the world. So don't underestimate the power of it.
All right. And on that note, thank you so much, B. Dave Walters, for coming to our Start Playing Games cohort. Share your wisdom with us.
Thank you.